Alright guys, welcome to Art History Tuesday. And today we're going to look at a very detail-oriented piece. Before we start, my question to you is, how do you think artists seek perfection? By setting a goal and then working to achieve it. Sometimes it is to get a piece detailed perfect, or maybe it's just to capture an idea. Right. So our definition of perfection and how we obtain that has definitely changed over time. It's not all about technicality anymore. Sometimes it's just about how we capture our viewers' attention. So that's a really great input, Elizabeth. Why don't you choose one of these to point out and tell me what you see, and I'll do the other. This is a piece that we're looking at today. There's definitely more going on here than we think. Hi Erin, welcome. So we have just started looking at this piece here. Ooh. So Elizabeth has grabbed the left descriptor. If you can look at the right piece over here, give me just your best guess as to what you think is happening. What's pointed over here. There's nothing wrong. Folded fabric, great. So on the left side we see shadows that depict depth, and on the right side we definitely see folded fabric. Very true. So we're looking a little bit closer at this piece. As we examine it more, can you please tell me what is something that makes you wonder in looking at this image? Ooh, what's behind her? Good question. Like a pretty average scene. And you wonder why the artist chose this. That's a great question and a really great thing to dive into for this semester, or for this piece. My dog, one second. I'm just going to turn this talk button off for a second and bring him in. Okay, so we were just talking about why would an artist spend so much time painting this really normal scene. We're looking at a piece which is not so subtly named the Milkmaid by Vermeer. Have you guys heard of Vermeer before? Does it sound familiar? No. Okay. So Vermeer is what we call a Dutch master. So this came after the Renaissance and the Baroque period. The Dutch masters were taking over. So let's see. The artist you looked at last week, Albert Dürer, was about a generation before this guy, Vermeer. And he is Dutch, so he's from way farther north in the Nordic countries. So imagine this is how people actually dressed at the time. It's a lot colder there. And the Dutch masters always painted scenes of their era. They didn't paint things from ancient Greece or ancient Rome. They didn't romanticize anything. Chase Vermeer, I don't know about that book. We'll have to ask him if it has anything to do with this artist. But Vermeer was probably the most celebrated in his day. His paintings were often really small too, so a lot of people tend to relate to them a little bit more. He worked at like the 9 by 12. Oh, Chasing Vermeer. Well, I bet it is about this artist then. I'm curious to hear about that plot. So this piece right here is supposed to be a piece that, on the surface level, it's really about like humility, right? The simple things in life. It was seen as taboo in this era to show your wealth. So you didn't want to show jewels and riches and things like that. But, you know, people obviously had a lot of wealth. And so this is a little after the Puritans, to give you guys a frame of reference. So the Puritans had come to the U.S., and this painting was happening around that time shortly afterwards. So there are lots of different Christian religions forming with different ideals from the past. And a lot were really pushing purity and humility. But this piece, while on the surface it's humble, it's really not. So what are what are some ways in which we're seeing wealth? Vibrant blue cloth, exactly. Hit your nail right on the head. Not only does she have this vibrant blue cloth, but what part of her gown is the cloth? So she's obviously a maid or a milkmaid. So what do you think this blue cloth serves as? An apron, right. So not only is it a very expensive dye, this blue, but she's using it to clean with. So everyone who did any work would wear an apron back then. Even if the house didn't have a lot of servants, you know, the main wife would wear an apron all the time in order to preserve her clothes, because clothes, you didn't have very much back then. The average person maybe had 2 outfits, if they were lucky, and only the wealthy had more. But if the maid can wear an expensive apron just to clean with, how wealthy is the master? Yeah. So, Erin, if you were wealthier, you owned some more clothes, you can have some finer things. But most people of the serving class only had about 2 outfits. Also keep in mind that bathing wasn't the same back here. It wasn't as bad as like in some parts of the Middle Ages, but people were a little smellier, for sure. Yeah, no, our requirements have definitely changed. Kind of back to here, if your maid can have the most expensive blue cloth as her apron, how wealthy do you think the master is? Extremely, right. This is one of the ways that he's showing off his wealth. And then he even has blue fabric just to cover the table. Now, traditionally back then, if you weren't wealthy, you would mainly wear the yellows and reds in your outfits. And green wasn't actually as common of a color at this time. It definitely existed, but the Dyers Guild was so big and important that they didn't actually like to mix yellow and blue. So green was actually harder to come by than we give it credit to. It's harder to find, even though we see it everywhere in nature. You'd think that it'd be easy just to create a green dye, but no, you only had to mix the yellow and blue dye to create that. But yeah, the master has a lot of money. You can see here that he has a vase with this blue and white porcelain, and that was probably actually shipped or commissioned from China at the time. Up here, you see there's baskets on the wall of bread, fancy lanterns, right? So you're right, the Dutch imports were huge, so probably you're seeing a little evidence of where that money is coming from. And then this milkmaid has a whole bunch of bread that she's cut up. And she's clearly about to feed a lot of people. So there's an idea there's lots of servants, there's lots of people in this house. The definition for beauty is also very different at this time. Now, do you guys think, looking at this piece, that the milkmaid is married or is she single? Single, right. What's your clue here? Her gut is on point that she's single. Right, her headpiece, this cover, this hair wrap. At this time in Northern Europe, remember we have these very strong Puritan roots here. Even in the house, women who were unmarried had to have their hair covered. Why? It wasn't really just about their face. It was about the culture, for sure. Exactly. You're on point, Elizabeth. So they're not so vain. So it was seen, it's kind of like you would be given dirty names, dirty looks, even probably called a slut at this time if you had your hair down and out in the open. In your house, you do not. You're allowed to have your hair visible by your husband in your house. It's seen as practical and also pious to wear it outside of the house for everyone, but that's when we have a whole culture of different head wraps and hairstyles and stuff. And there was a lot of trade happening with the East, so you're seeing actually some inclusion of turbans here and there, believe it or not. Some different kinds of head wraps that they would borrow from different cultures that they were trading with, as the Dutch were very well traveled. But this woman was seen by everybody at her time as a beauty. Not only is she beautiful because she's clearly healthy and strong, she doesn't look like she's wasting away, and her clothes are really well put together for a milkmaid who would work outside and inside a lot. But even her skin is seen as really clean, and her forehead, notice that it goes back quite a lot. By our standards today, we would consider that a larger forehead. What's probably happening too is that she has been tweezing the hairs of where her natural hairline would stop. Probably about, let me give it a line right here. Probably at about right here, her natural hairline would stop. X marks the spot. But she's tweezed it back a little bit to make her forehead seem more beautiful. And this was a big deal at the time. This happened for several hundred years in the West. Big foreheads were a sign of beauty. And even in the Renaissance era, women would often tweeze their eyebrows so that their forehead would look even bigger. Yeah, you know, our cultural standards change, for sure. If you have a naturally larger forehead, know that you were seen as a hottie at that time. Literally, it would be an extra cause for marrying you. But yeah, so she was seen as beautiful in this era, and thus she is pious, but also a sort of an object of temptation as well. And can you guess who commissioned this painting to be made? What person in her life do you think would want to have this hanging in their house? Right, or also the master, too. So imagine a master has this hanging in his own house, his maid, his food, all the garments and everything. He's probably going to have a lot of people visiting, and they're going to walk in and see these gorgeous paintings of humble things. But in those paintings, they're picking up on, you know, where he is bragging. Not only does he have money for all this fabric and clothing and stuff, but he also has money to hire the most beautiful of maids and such. So we're seeing a definite divide in culture. Everyone's outwardly humble, but if you have wealth, the people are being subtle in how they show it, for sure. Just having a painting alone made of this scene is not so subtle way of showing it too. So Vermeer, though, on this word, Vermeer, though, was seen as a master in his time. So left right here we have a image of Vermeer. You see him working. This is definitely how he wants to be seen in academic. Paintings were so expensive, painted by these artists, that they all had patrons. So rather than you paying for, imagine rather than someone buying your artwork or commissioning an artwork from you and then giving you money, they instead paid for your rent, your lunch, your food. They did the finances for you for as long as it takes for you to make work. So the culture was kind of in reverse now. We now as artists have to finance our own lives and sort of make sure we charge the right amount so that we can afford to live. But it was backwards back then. Basically, if someone wanted your work, they would pay for your time, your energy, your life, your family. But Vermeer was actually a tinkerer. That's the best way kind to describe him. So we had actually known about the concept of the camera since ancient Rome, believe it or not. But never have we been able to actually preserve an image on paper until about the 1800s. Vermeer was well before then. He's the late 1600s, early 1700s. He still didn't have an image preserved on paper. But Vermeer did something a little bit more clever. If you see right here, to the right, is the basic concept of a camera. And all you do is you can try this in your own bedroom if you want to. You fill your room so that there's no light. So if there's windows in your room, you completely cover them. Make sure you put fabric underneath the door. Don't let any light in, and that's 100% important. And what you do is you make a pinprick, a small little hole of light from the outside in. And what will happen is, because of how light travels, you're going to see a reversed image of that outside on your wall. Vermeer figured out how to do that. And he then figured out the best thing, as a painter, he would set up these camera obscuras and have scenes in one part of the room flipped over and projected onto his paper. So that as he was painting, he could actually be tracing. And he could look at the color changes perfectly on the paper and then try and match them. Yes, he was so smart for his era, right? People loved his work and didn't know why. If you're looking for a famous book and movie and artwork, research The Girl, you probably heard of this before, with the Pearl Earring. This is from back when Scarlett Johansson was a very young actress. And notice her name, Johansson. She actually has some Dutch background, of course. She stars as one of the Vermeer subjects, and they play out a melodrama that might be fictitious of Vermeer's life, in which he has fallen in love with one of his models, which is interesting because the person who wrote that book was actually an art historian, but because they added this level of historical fiction onto their book, they were scoffed at in the art world, even though a lot of the accounts of different things were true, but they played up the melodrama, and thus the historians didn't take them seriously. But it quickly caught the acclaim of lots of people. Back when I started teaching, I think back in 2012, that was actually a book on like a recommended high school reading list. So it's actually appropriate for your age too, if you're interested in this artist further. But there's also a movie if you don't want to read. But going into a little bit more of Vermeer's technology here, I have a link for you, which is really short. It's a trailer for a movie, which you might actually be able to stream for free, called Tim's Vermeer. And when you're done watching the trailer, they show you in there a lot of what the artists who did the research figured out. Just come back and write on the board some of the things that surprised you. Yeah, and he has less of a painting background than most people do. Even you guys probably have painted more than him before he started this whole process. It took so long. So very true. You're very right. So imagine how much the patrons would have had to pay for the artist to live in the amount of time they're making it. It kind of also makes sense why you'd want to stretch out a painting, right? But Vermeer's paintings were definitely worth it for most of these patrons. Yeah, yeah. And this was Vermeer's, his full-time job. He did probably at least 80 hours a week he probably put into the effort of working on this. So the honors question, which I've already posted for you guys, so I did it early today, is, does using a new technology in your art change its legitimacy? So Vermeer was very smart and clever for how he used his technology. But do you guys think that it in some way takes away from the oil painting at all? And does that apply to your own art? So no. He still painted it, right? Can you guys see how questions like this might cause some issues in the art world today? Yeah, for sure. There's lots of argument, like outright argument in art schools and studios and magazines and online about what is true painting, what is true sculpture, things like that. And by no means does everyone agree. So I'm curious to see how this conversation evolves for sure. The task is always to try and hear one another's side. So if this image makes you laugh, that's good. This is a current Dutch artist named Hendrik Kirsten. And this is a photographer, and his daughter looks very Dutch, and so she became the subject of a lot of his paintings, inspired by Vermeer as well as some of the other Dutch masters. And he's very funny. So as I told you, women did a lot to cover their hair back then if they were unmarried, as his daughter is unmarried in this image. But what has she covered her hair with? Yes. All right. I don't know why they have a bag on her head instead of getting fabric. For sure. So this is a plastic bag. Imagine how much she had to find, how much work it was going into actually finding an unbranded, clean plastic bag. Yes, it's definitely supposed to be funny. But looking at it, you're not sure at first, right? It seems so serious. Her face and her expression, her makeup even seems so serious, and then that turtleneck as well, bringing all the focus to the classic face, and then it has this plastic bag on her head that's been pulled and shaped to look like one of those older pieces of fabric from back in the day. It even looks like it has like that that Puritan style hat going on there. But yeah, so he's definitely working to bring humor to his own cultural history. Yeah, yeah, it's you know, it feels like a joke in translation at first, right? Where if you're sitting in a Spanish class or a French class and like they tell you a joke in Spanish or French that's really common, but there's a delay because you have to understand what they're talking about in order to get the joke, and by the time you get it, you like it's not funny anymore. That's sometimes what it feels like when you're looking at pieces from different cultures that are making jokes about their own history. It's hard to tell, right? It's hard. You're like, are they making a statement on environmentalism? What's going on here? Yeah. We want to. I feel like, especially with art, we want to be more serious. And Vermeer's work were so completely serious. But Kirsten, however, is definitely making fun or playing around with his own cultural history. Yeah, she does, with that turtleneck for sure. This, I believe, is a zoomed-in image of the original, but yeah, the value, if you look from where the edge of her shirt is very vague as to her shirt versus the background. You have to really look for it. But these, if you type in his name, you can see some of his pieces in a gallery show. And they're huge. He has huge prints of these, just staring at your face. So as soon as you walk into the room, you can see them clearly from across the other side. But this guy is interesting. If you look into a little bit of his history, he had a completely different 9-to-5 job and hated it, and just kind of wanted to be a stay-at-home dad / photographer. So him and his wife switched roles when his daughter was younger. And she went to work and bring home the bacon, and he stayed home to help raise the daughter. And then they sort of, you know, in showing her history and art, right, I totally agree. In showing her history and art, they started to play around with how to make it relatable to her. And then this whole sort of series ended up evolving. So this is her, you know, obviously mature self, but you can see how him taking photos of her and putting themselves in the shoes of these great artists, they started to almost develop a humor about it. Okay. So back to the original piece. You guys can, it's a free form fill. Whatever comes to mind. How would you describe this style, right? It's not a very, while the subject is a little bit basic, the process is very detailed. It looks almost photographic. Awesome. You guys are so good. Yeah, humble yet boasting. That's a great way to describe this. When I see pieces like this, it always makes me think about the people I know in my own life. Like, how are we humble yet boasting? It kind of feels like a backdoor compliment or something. Or not. What's the expression? Like when someone's like looking for attention, they're like, "Oh, I'm just when their hair obviously looks good, they're like, "Oh, my hair never looks good." That's you feel like you have to compliment them. So like the humble yet boasting kind of makes me feel like. Yes, and Drew has worked with a lot of detail. Differently, right. Awesome. So give me a check mark when you're done so I know when you guys want to move on. I don't want to move forward and interrupt someone's typing. Cool. So move forward. All right, compare and contrast. I always love compare and contrast. It's always the easiest of them. But how are they similar and how are they different? I think there's a lot more similarity this time around. I'm going to claim the obvious one. There. Nope. Nutty. Let me put that in quotes. Great. And once again, if you feel like you're all done, give me a check mark. Next. So in your opinion, how do you think the work like the Milkmaid has impacted the art world? And maybe it's more about the artist itself and his process here. Yeah. So something interesting is we only really have a newfound appreciation for Vermeer's techniques. They were somewhat known of at the time, but a lot of the work came in researching his studio and his artifacts and how he was using it. So people at the time had a basic idea of what he was doing, but they were only hiring him for the product. They didn't really care about what technique he took to get there. Yeah. And I do like that this is an artist that is painting people of the era and of the time in the costumes and the outfits that they were wearing a normal day-to-day business. So yeah, it's kind of, there's like an anthropological side to his stuff. It's almost like a photo coming straight out of that era. All right? And lastly, how does learning about this work impact you and your own work? I'm going to take the bottom right corner one. I'm going to give a quote that my first art teacher told me. So I heard this quote from my art teacher when I was in the 9th grade, and it really, it stuck with me till today. There is no such thing as cheating in art, only plagiarism. And by that he means that there is no wrong way to create something, as long as you don't steal something, right? And he would say this all the time. So when I'd be in class and we'd all be following through with the project, and there's someone who somehow finished it 3 steps before, and it looks amazing, and we asked them how they did it, and they came up and they told you like 5 or 6 steps that they worked around and something else they figured out. I remember they would look to our teacher and say, didn't they do it wrong? And he said, well, technically there's no such thing as cheating, only plagiarism. So if they found a shortcut, a better way to do it, then I won't fault them for it. Yeah. Playing around with light. Oh my gosh, guys. If you want a good selfie, the window. Or any seller's photos, put something in the window and that beautiful light that comes in. It just looks classic. But I think that's why so many people take selfies in the car, is because they have that window light coming in. You should definitely play around with that, Erin. I think anyone who likes photography should play around with that, and even actual painting as well, or a mixture of the two. I actually know a lot of artists who, as a workaround, will take a photo of something, print it, and then paint on top of that photo, which is totally your work, so of course you can do it. Ooh, that's fortunate. I love natural light. If I'm at home, I don't like to have the lights on in the house at all. I prefer to turn them all off and just open up the windows during the day. My eyes always adjust better. I feel better. No headaches. Alright. I'm going to turn off the record button.